So in writing, we're starting a new unit, and that unit is on fairy tale adaptation. So ultimately, you're going to pick a fairy tale and you're going to adapt it or change it in some way. And to go along with that, we need to read some fairy tales. We need to read both classic versions, original versions if we can find them. Although, to be honest with you, sometimes the true original versions are pretty violent and dark. And then read adaptations of those, updated versions or versions that have been changed in some way. So we're going to be able to take a look at both of those things, and that's going to help you be able to figure out ways that you can make your own adaptations of some of these classics. And we're going to start today with Little Red Riding Hood. The first one we're going to read is The Brothers Grimm, which is a more classic version. And then we're going to go over and we're going to read something called Honestly, Red Riding Hood Was Rotten, the story of Red Riding Hood as told by the wolf. And some things that you should think about along the way in terms of thinking of your own fairy tale adaptations are things that you can change. Like you can change the setting or the place where it happens. You can change, for example, Red Riding Hood, rather than happening in the woods, could happen in a city or a town. You could change who's telling the story. So that's like what we're going to see today. Rather than hearing it through either Red Riding Hood's perspective or the perspective of a narrator, you could hear it from the wolf's side of the story, like hear what he has to say about the events. You can change the characters. So rather than it being a wolf, you could change it to something else. It could be a person, if you want. Red Riding Hood is a girl classically, but you could change it to a boy. So there's all sorts of changes that you can make, and that's what I want you paying attention to in this story, and that's what I want you paying attention to in the other classic fairy tales and fairy tale adaptations that we read in order for you to be able to improve as a writer yourself. All right, that said, let's read the Brothers Grimm version of Little Red Riding Hood. Bear with me, the words are really small on this, so sometimes it's hard to see them. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was loved by all who knew her, but especially by her grandmother. Grandmother had given the child a red velvet hood, and the little girl loved it so much that she would never wear anything else. And so she got the nickname Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother said to her, "Red Riding Hood, take this cake and bottle of cordial to grandmother. She is not feeling well, and they will do her good. But promise me you won't stray from the path. Walk straight to grandmother's, and be sure to say good morning when you get there." Little Red Riding Hood promised and set out with her basket. Grandmother lived in the woods, a half-hour's walk from the village. As Little Red Riding Hood walked along, she saw a wolf in front of her on the path. She had never met a wolf before, so she was not a bit afraid. "Good morning, Red Riding Hood," he said. "Good morning, Wolf," she answered, remembering to be polite. "Where might you be going this fine day?" the wolf asked. "To grandmother's house," Red Riding Hood told him. "She has not been feeling well." "And what do you have in your basket?" asked the wolf. "Some cake and some cordial," said Red Riding Hood, "to make her feel better." "Where does your grandmother live?" the wolf wanted to know. "A bit further in the woods," Red Riding Hood told him. "Straight down this path." "Hmm," said the wolf. "This little girl will make a tasty treat, indeed, much more tender than the old woman. I will have the old woman for dinner, and this little morsel for dessert." The wolf walked away. Sorry, I'm trying to move my picture here. The wolf walked a little way with Red Riding Hood. Then he said, "Look at all the lovely flowers. I'm sure your grandmother would love to have some." Red Riding Hood looked at all the bright flowers dancing in the woods. "What a perfect gift for grandmother," she thought. "It is still early. I have plenty of time to pick a nice bouquet." So, Little Red Riding Hood left the path to pick some flowers. But each time she picked one, she saw another a little further on, and so she wandered deeper and deeper into the woods. Meanwhile, the wolf went straight to grandmother's cottage and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" called grandmother. "It is Red Riding Hood," said the wolf in his sweetest voice he could manage. "Lift the latch and come in, my dear," said grandmother. I am too weak to get out of bed." The wolf lifted the latch, sprang through the door, and swallowed up the poor old woman whole. Then he put on her gown and nightcap, and climbed into her bed, and drew the curtains. When Red Riding Hood had picked all the flowers she could carry, she hurried to Grandmother's house. She was surprised to see the door standing open. "Good morning, Grandmother," she called from the doorway. But no one answered. She walked over to the bed and opened the curtains. There lay her grandmother, but she had pulled her nightcap around her face, and she looked very odd. "Oh, Grandmother," said Red Riding Hood, "what big ears you have! The better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf. "Oh, Grandmother, what big eyes you have! The better to see you with," said the wolf. "Oh, Grandmother, what big teeth you have!" said Red Riding Hood. "The better to eat you with, my dear," cried the wolf, and he swallowed Red Riding Hood right up. Then he crawled back under the covers for a nap. A short while later, a hunter passed the house and thought, "The old woman is snoring very loudly. I must see if something is wrong." He went inside. When he went inside, he found the wolf fast asleep in Grandmother's bed. The hunter was just about to shoot the wolf when he wondered where the old woman might be. Had the wolf eaten her? The hunter pulled out his knife and cut open the sleeping wolf to check. The first thing he saw was Little Red Riding Hood. Was a Little Red Hood, and Red Riding Hood jumped out. Then out climbed her grandmother. The hunter sent Red Riding Hood to gather some big stones. Then he filled the wolf with stones and sewed him back up. The wolf woke up with a belly full of stones. He tried to roll over. Then he tried to sit. Finally, he managed to get to his feet for a few seconds. Then he fell down dead. The hunter skinned the wolf and took the skin home to his family. Grandmother ate the cake and sipped the cordial that Red Riding Hood had brought, and soon she felt quite strong. After that, Red Riding Hood often walked to Grandmother's house, but she never again strayed from the path, and she never, ever talked to wolves. There we go. That is the um, more classic version. And let's go now and take a look at an adaptation of that story. So again, let me get my picture out of the way here. And this is Honestly, Red Riding Hood Was Rotten, the story of Little Red Riding Hood as told by the wolf. And over here it says, "Of course you think I did a horrible thing by eating Little Red Riding Hood and her granny. You don't know the other side of the story." Let's find out. Chomp chomp. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just finishing my lunch. My name's Wolf. Big Bad Wolf. You may have heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood, about a girl and her granny. Seems everyone has. My tale is different." Did I say tail? I meant tail. Notice he spelled it Tail, like his actual tail, and Tale is tail, like a story. "Once upon a time, I ran out of food. Completely. The cupboards were bare, the freezer too, and I'd eaten every last vegetable and fruit in the garden. Every one. Other wolves might have lunched on little forest critters, chipmunks, bunnies, squirrels. But I'm a vegetarian. That's right. I don't eat meat. Well, I try not to. I love apples. Honeycrisp, Pink Lady, Golden Delicious, any kind, really. But sadly, it was a long time until apple harvest. I hadn't eaten in weeks. My stomach growled and howled. It moaned and groaned. It even roared. Then my nose took over. Sniff, sniff. I took a whiff. What was it? A girl. Sniff, sniff. I took a whiff. What was it? Cake, butter. In this forest? I had to investigate. And there she was, Little Red Riding Hood. She looked as plump and juicy as a big sweet apple. Little Red waved her cape. "Isn't it pretty?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "Aren't I pretty?" she said. Was she admiring herself in that puddle? "With this cape," she said, "I'm even prettier than usual." Boy, someone was sure full of herself. My stomach growled. Little Red twirled a strand of hair. Mother says the cape looks grand with my skin. My skin shines like pearls. Or the meat of a ripe apple, I thought, licking my chops. Remember, I hadn't eaten in weeks. Time to chomp. But then Little Red said, I can't wait until Granny sees how pretty I am today. I'm bringing her cake and butter from my mother. My stomach howled. 2 meals, I thought. Granny for breakfast, Little Red for lunch, and the cake and butter for dessert. Where does Granny live? I asked. Little Red pointed. Down there, in the clearing, the brown house. I knew that house, and I had a plan. Let's play a game, I said. Little Red smiled. I'm awesome at games. I bet you are, I said. You take this path, I'll take that path, and let's see who arrives at Granny's first. I will, she said. I'm the prettiest and the fastest. I bet you are, I said. My stomach moaned. Before it groaned, I ran. No one knows the forest like I do. I chose the shorter path. Sniff, sniff. I took a whiff. What was it? Apple air freshener. Tap, tap. I knocked on the door. Who's there? Called out a voice. Your granddaughter, I squeaked. I've brought you cake and butter from mother. Door's open, Granny said. Granny tugged at her nightcap. Green, she said. Isn't it pretty? Pretty like a Granny Smith apple, I thought. Aren't I pretty? Granny said. You must have heard the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Well, that's true. My stomach roared. What's that noise? Granny asked. Chomp, chomp. I had to eat her. She was no Macintosh apple, but not too bad. I still felt hungry. Tap, tap. Little Red knocked on the door. Who's there? I called out, crawling into Granny's bed. Your granddaughter, Little Red said. I've brought you cake and butter from mother. Door's open, I said. Little Red walked in and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Isn't my cape pretty, Granny? She said. Aren't I pretty? I clenched my teeth. Granny, Little Red said, what deep dark eyes I have. I said, the color of apple seeds. Granny, she said, what perfect ears I have. I said. Oh, I have something. There we go. Shaped like sharply cut apple slices. Granny, she said, what pretty red lips I have. I said, red delicious. Granny, she said, what lovely skin I have. Chomp, chomp. I ate her up. What can I say? Things look different when you're hungry. She was no Fuji or Crispin apple. In fact, to be honest, she was a bit rotten, but she was better than nothing. Plus, I got dessert. And then over here, over here it says, in the Think About It section, it says, read a classic version of Little Red Riding Hood. Now look at the Big Bad Wolf's version of the story. List some things that have happened in the classic version that didn't happen in the Wolf's version. Then list some things that happened in the Wolf's version that didn't happen in the classic version. How are the two versions different? Then there are some other things that you can look at there as well. But the point I really want to make with this is first just to expose you to what a fairy tale adaptation is, to know that there's a difference between the classic ones and the ones that people have changed in some way, and then to give you one possible way that you can adapt a fairy tale of your own. So one way is to tell it from somebody else's point of view or perspective, which is what was done by this author. So we learned about the Wolf's version here versus a version told not by Red Riding Hood, but by a narrator who's sort of following Red Riding Hood. And that's one great way to do it. We also saw some other changes in there. So the setting was mostly the same, but slightly different. Like she didn't live in exactly the same place. She didn't go and pick flowers. So some of the events were different. Some of the details were different. Like she wasn't bringing the same things in her basket. The story didn't necessarily start exactly the same way. And the characters acted a little bit different in both versions too. Like the grandmother and Red Riding Hood both acted different in this version than they did in the other version. So those are just a couple of ways that you can start to think about adapting your own fairy tale. So your mission today is to think of a fairy tale you might want to adapt. It could be Red Riding Hood, it could be something else, and start to write about how you might adapt that. Now, again, I'm not asking you to write a fairy tale adaptation today. I'm just asking you to list what fairy tale you might be interested in doing. So think of classic fairy tales and think about which one you might want to work with, and then write about what you might change. So if you were this author and I had given this assignment, you might say, I'm adapting Little Red Riding Hood. My plan is to write this from the wolf's perspective. I'm going to do that because I think it would be interesting to hear a different side of the story, I, and so on and so forth. Give me a couple more sentences about why you want to do that. I'll then give you some feedback, and we can get moving forward tomorrow on Tuesday with your first versions or your first drafts of an adaptation for a classic fairy tale. And as the week goes on, we'll read a bunch of different classic fairy tales. We'll also read a bunch of adaptations of those fairy tales too. I hope you enjoyed the stories, and I hope that you have some idea for your own writing. If you have any questions, let me know. This is going to be more similar to the writing that we did in class in terms of more of a process, like so not a prompt that you answer, but something that takes a couple of weeks to finish. So we're going to be working on these drafts for a week or two, and then we'll move forward and start to publish them after that. So again, if you have any questions, please let me know.